Welcome back to Bill Russo's Short Story Theater. This is Martha May, your host for episode 14 of season 2. We're coming to you from the little theater in the alley just off Main Street, and we have a treat for you in this episode. Basil Nightingale will present Tales from the Book of Gord. Though it is unlikely that any physical copies of the ancient text have survived into the 21st century, the stories have been kept alive in the memories of the old folks, who heard them from parents or grandparents as bedtime tales long ago in the early and middle 1900s. Is the Book of Gord full of real stories? Is it just an allegory? Perhaps it is merely a collection of yarns to make people feel good? The verdict is in your hands, and your ears, dear listener, as you hear for yourself, the Book of Gord. Here's our presenter, Basil Nightingale.
I don't know for sure how many copies of the Book of Gord were printed. I don't even know when it was printed. I do know that it is a very ancient work. The only copy I ever saw belonged to my grandmother. About the volume itself, I can recall little, yet I'll never forget the stories she read from it. As a small boy some 80 years ago, I listened intently as she related the adventures of Gord. Like all boys of that time, as he neared manhood, Gord was sent to war. Though he was admitted into the army, he certainly was not embraced as a warrior. He was not a large man, and he was not powerful. He positively lacked most of the skills which military people desire in a recruit. He certainly could not lift a goat off the ground. As a runner, he finished every race he ran, but always trailed at the back of the pack. When Gord swung an axe to take down a tree, he required many more swings than the respected wood choppers, whose earnings were measured by the number of trees they toppled in a day. During his early training, he ranked among the lowest and weakest of the troops in his company. His efforts were always sincere, but they did not produce sufficient results for him to be considered fit for anything more than guard duty or fire watch. In the days before gunpowder, fire was one of the most lethal weapons possessed by the generals of an army. Fire starters were among the most skilled of troops, and were often sent on daring missions, to secretly enter enemy territory, and lay waste to cities, by igniting a series of lethal fires. A single well-placed inferno could cause more damage to an opposing nation than 1,000 mounted men, armed with sword and spear. And so it was, that in the historic Battle of the Great Stone Canyon, little Gord found himself relegated to a lookout position in enemy territory, at the far end of the canyon. The Great Stone Canyon separated the nation of Gord's people from their enemies, the dreaded tribe known as the Murderous Valley Dwellers. Gord's tribesmen were hill people. Their homes clung precariously to the sides of the steep slopes of the mountains. The people of the hills hopped from rock to rock with a skill that almost matched the mountain goats that they kept in the hundreds of herds spread throughout their land. The valley people were huge, brutish creatures who rode large, heavy horses. Those horses were valuable in the flatlands, but useless in the hill country of Gord's land. Gord's people, much smaller than the valley tribe, rode nimble, snow-white, mountain goats with sharp horns, as long as a spear. Looking down from his perch at the top of the ridge, onto the mouth of the canyon, Gord could see the army of the enemy. Hundreds of mounted warriors were followed by an even larger group of foot soldiers, each man carrying a sharp spear and a finely honed sword. At a gallop, the horseman could reach the other end of the Great Stone Canyon in about 1 hour. The footmen, even at a stiff pace, would require at least 2 hours to make their way through the narrow, winding canyon. Mounted on his sure-footed snow-white goat, Gord knew that he could get back to his own troops much faster than the horsemen of the enemy. His orders when spotting the valley soldiers were to immediately return to his base and report the enemy's position and strength. Gord climbed on Snowstorm, his powerful and shaggy goat, and prepared to spring from boulder to boulder in a hasty ride back to the base. Snowstorm stiffened, and readied himself for the run. He dislodged a tiny pebble which tumbled a few feet down the ridge, where it bumped into another tiny pebble. The two little rocks continued to tumble down the ridge, bumping into other rocks, and by the time they reached the edge of the canyon, there were dozens of rocks in the fall, some as big as an apple. Acting intuitively, Gord ran Snowstorm in circles. The big white's feet kicked up scores of rocks large and small. Whirling and twirling, Snowstorm generated a swirling tidal wave of hard, jagged rocks. Dash away Snowstorm, Gord commanded, and the powerful goat sprang up the ridge, heading towards home. In its wake was an ever-growing avalanche that dislodged enormous boulders, and sent them plunging to the very bottom of the Great Stone Canyon. Mounting up at the mouth of the narrow passage, as high as the tallest trees, the great fall of pebbles, stones, and boulders, plummeted down and sealed off the canyon. It created an impassable barrier that not only prevented the valley people from sending more troops, but also trapped the hundreds of foot soldiers and mounted warriors inside the canyon, with no place to go, except towards the fortified base of the army of Gord's people. Even before the sun could force the long shadows cast by large oblong rocks looking like sentinels at the top of the ridge, to move even a tiny fraction, Gord and the noble goat, Snowstorm, were already at the other end of the canyon. Once again he urged the powerful mountain goat to dance furiously in circles. Twirling, whirling, bouncing, and kicking, Snowstorm created an avalanche of monstrous proportions. Huge boulders 10 times as large as the biggest houses of the village, crashed to the bottom of Stone Canyon, forming a second impassable wall. The troops of the valley people were now trapped in the narrow passage between the hills of Gord's territory, and the flatlands of their home nation. There was certainly no way out for the horses. As for the large and coarse men of the valley tribe, they were not built for climbing. Perhaps a few might be able to scale the massive wall of rocks. But it would be a straight-up climb the length of 100 of the tallest trees. Very few valley men would be able to claw their way out of Stone Canyon. Trapped they were. Cut off from their own people and sitting targets for the hill people. Gord reported to his superior officers and explained what he had done. So impressive was his feat, that he was instantly promoted to the rank of general, and put in charge of the entire army. The valley people knew very well that their position was indefensible, and they quickly surrendered to Gord, who agreed to work with them to remove the walls blocking the ends of the canyon. The two nations soon straightened out their differences and joined together into one nation of 2 states. Over the next few years a number of other tribes joined the Union, and Gord's country became the second most powerful nation of the ancient earth. It was rivaled only by the tribes of the fishermen, who lived in an area next to the valley people. While Gord's people were herders, and the valley people were farmers, the fishermen were just that, catchers of fish. In elaborate boats, some as long as 5 tall trees, they set sail upon the ocean, sometimes staying afloat for 7 sunsets or more, before returning with a boat full of flavorful fish that would be grilled on flames, and served with clams, lobsters, and oysters baking upon hot rocks placed at the edge of the fire. Though Gord wanted peace, the fishermen did not. They planned to invade the unified nation of Gord and the valley people. The fishermen were even bigger and stronger than the coarse valley people. An average fisherman was fully twice as tall as the average man of Gord's tribe. Gord heard rumors that the fishermen were preparing to make war. Gord was now the undisputed ruler of the nation of the valley people, the hill people, and several other tribes. He decided to send fire starters, and spies, into the land of the fishermen. If the spies detected solid evidence that there was going to be war, Gord was prepared to make the first strike. When he got the news from his spies, that the fishermen were indeed ready to attack, Gord's firestarters burned every single city of the fishermen to the ground. That should have ended the war before it started, but Gord miscalculated. The fishermen merely took refuge in their boats. Gord created a naval commission, but it was charged with building just one single ship. And it was not to be a warship. Gord had another plan in mind. The nation of the fishermen consisted of dozens of villages on the seashore. Every single one of their settlements was built alongside the rock-bound coast that separated the ocean from the dwelling places of the fishing people. The firestarters reduced the villages to ashes, but the fishermen easily survived, by retreating to the safety of their boats. With Gord in the lead, riding atop the powerful snow-white mountain goat called Snowstorm, a column of more than 300 men, all riding longhorn mountain goats, hopped along the trail leading to the capital city of the fishermen. Upon arrival at the rocky coastline, Gord shouted, "Dash away! Dash away, Snowstorm!" The powerful snow-white mountain goat bounded on top of the rocky ridge separating the ocean from the low-lying land of the fish people, and began scattering the rocks, as it whirled and twirled. Its sharp dew claws dislodged little rocks as first, then bigger ones. His massive horns, as big as a fisherman is tall, ripped underneath huge boulders, pushing them aside with ease. The other 300 mounted warriors joined in. Jammed together in a small bunch atop the uneven wall of rocks, the group of rugged little 300-pound mountain goats looked like a blizzard descending upon the coastline. At first it appeared as merely a dusting of white snow upon the black and slate-grey rocks. But as more and more granite stones began to be kicked into the ocean, the rocky coastline disappeared under the blizzard attack of the shaggy white goats. As the dark green water started gushing from the ocean, spilling onto the low-lying fields, and flooding the streets of the village, Gord called retreat. The 300 goats splashed their way back to high ground. The 300 soldiers riding the goats watched as the entire city vanished under wave after wave of icy water from the ocean. In every village and city of the fishing people, the process was repeated. The ocean was drained out into the lowlands that were the home of the cities. The result was that all the villages and cities were flooded. The drain of water from the ocean was so great, that the level of the sea became so low, that the fishing boats of the fish people hit bottom, and were useless. All the boats keeled over on their sides, dumping the fish people into water that was barely as high as their waist. Gord went to his naval commission and was informed that his unusual boat was ready to launch. The boat was unlike any ever seen on the planet. It was the largest vessel by far that had ever been built. It had a flat bottom. It could easily float in an ocean that was now half as deep as a fisherman is tall. Gord sent his boat on a mission to rescue all of the people of the fisherman's nation. They were fed and treated well. They were told that they could either join Gord's country, or be held prisoners for life. The fishing people were impressed that they were treated well, and fed well. They decided that Gord was a great leader and they willingly became citizens of the nation of Gord. The fish people were always thankful that Gord rescued them from the great flood, with his boat called Noah. In the ancient world, Gord ruled his nation for many years. The philosophy that he preached, and his people followed, was that the world is nothing more than a giant house. Everyone who lives in the house is responsible for its care and upkeep. Gord said that all citizens are members of the same family. He advised his people to treat everyone as if they were a favorite brother or sister. The people of Gord were the happiest and healthiest people the world has ever known. And his country was the most prosperous in history. The arts, including painting, reading, and writing, were held in the highest esteem. The nation under Gord was the most civilized place on planet Earth. Strangers smiled at each other and greeted each other. "Hello, nice to see you, God bless you," said one person to another. "Thanks, stranger, and may God bless and keep you too," was the customary reply. Even today, many thousands of years later, Gord's nation would still rank at the top of the list of the most serene and wealthiest of all countries. Sadly, Gord's nation and indeed his entire world, disappeared many years ago. A volcano appeared. First as little more than a pimple in the middle of the land. It rapidly grew, and in a period of just a few days, became an inferno that shot molten lava high into the sky. The lava cooled as it fell, and hardened into sharp jagged rocks, pummeling the beleaguered land. In a matter of days, the entire land mass boiled away, and was swallowed by the sea. Only one thing escaped. Noah, the ship. Somehow, Noah slipped its moorings and sailed away from the sinking land. With not a single soul aboard, Noah drifted many days, before coming to rest at the side of a mountain, somewhere in an area that is now called the nation of Turkey. According to the legend, there was nothing on board the ship called Noah. No food, no clothing, no furniture. Nothing. Except a pile of books. Perhaps 10 or 20 copies at most. A small mound of books. The title of which read, The Book of Gord.
You've been listening to Basil Nightingale reading from the Book of Gord. Tonight's play was written especially for short story theater by Bill Russo. We hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please share it and like it on Facebook, YouTube, or any podcast site. This is Martha May, speaking. Thanks for listening, and may God bless you. We have more than 50 episodes available, so please come back again real soon. Please do.